In this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about some of the reasons why I don't recommend spine extension exercises. I've done some videos about this in the past. I've put the links below so you can check those out. I'll go into more detail as to what I'm talking about here, but I wanted to try and, in some respects, sort of summarise, tie up some loose ends, and potentially answer some questions and comments that I've had on those videos, which have asked about certain exercises and when sort of they can be used or shouldn't be used and things like that. So sort of tie up a few ends, summarise it a little bit. But reason number one is it could be a pain trigger. So going into spine extension could be a pain trigger. Now there are areas of health and fitness, so it could be sort of core training or exercise rehabilitation that are being given out by certain practitioners. It could be yoga, it could be Pilates, but what they tend to do is just a blanket term of this helps lower back pain. And this is unfortunate for the very simple reason is the individual will have a specific type of pain trigger. So spine extension is one of those triggers. Spine flexion is one of the triggers. Rotation, compression. So there are different types of mechanisms that create or trigger the pain in someone's back. Now, if someone is going into spinal extension, doing a back extension or a cobra pose or anything like that, and it's aggravating or it becomes painful later on, then it's a good idea not to do that because it's triggering the pain. It's doing the opposite to what you want it to do. Now, the only way you can understand that is by going through an assessment. This is what I take anyone that comes to see me, be it face-to-face or through the online coaching, this is what I get them to do, is an assessment which looks for and investigates the specific pain triggers, spinal extension being one of them. So if they come to me face to face, I guide them through it face to face. If they go through the online coaching, it's all done video based. It's a self-assessment, so you take yourself through it. Obviously, I'm coaching you through it through the videos, and then you would feed the information back to me via the online coaching, and then I would put in the recommended advice and sort of recommendations, which is what I would then do if I'm working with someone face to face. So we go through that. That identifies if spine extension is a trigger. If it is, simply we just stop doing it. Because what we don't want to do is do the exact thing that triggers the pain. We want to try and avoid that. So we can then wind down that pain and then we can start putting in place better recommendations and advice. Number two is the lower back muscles. When you try to strengthen them, they don't stabilize the lumbar spine as well as the mid-back muscles. So again, if we go into like a gym environment or a rehabilitation environment, there are these machines, they're called back extension machines. You sit in them, you have a pad across your back, and then you push it backwards like that. Those are, in some respects, there to target the lower back muscles. But what we find is that the lower back muscles don't stabilize the spine as well as the mid-back muscles. So it's more effective to train mid-back muscles than lower back muscles. So when it comes to the lower back, when we strengthen those muscles, which would also be done in a back extension, we aren't necessarily stabilizing the spine as we want it to be stabilized. And the reason that the mid-back muscles are more effective at stabilizing the lumbar spine is because they have a longer moment arm. So if you can imagine tightening a nut and you've got or even loosening a nut, and you've got a really small handle, it's very hard to either tighten or loosen that nut. If you've got a very long handle and you're out here, it's much easier to tighten or loosen that nut. That's what the mid-back muscles give to the lower back. They give that long arm so that when they contract, they stabilize much more effectively. So again, these lower back muscle strengthening exercises aren't the most effective ones for overcoming lower back pain or even treating lower back pain, and more specifically treating an extension based pain. Number three is that it irritates the facet joints. So if we take, you've got two, so there's a vertebra, you've obviously got a disc here, and then another vertebra sits on top. Now, out the back of the vertebra, you've got what's are called like spinous processes. So they're the bits that sort of stick out. Now, what allows those vertebrae to move on top of each other are little joints on these little protrusions. So basically, the vertebra below and above are in some respects joined together via these facet joints. Now, because they're on the back, so imagine this is the facet joint. So if I go like that, and then I go into extension, I would basically squeeze my thumbs together, and then it comes off and it loosens, and then I go into extension and it squeezes them together. So every time I do a back extension, cobra pose, anything that means that I'm extending my spine, be it on the floor, on a mat, on a machine, whatever it is, I am potentially squeezing those facet joints together. That is then creating some degrees of inflammation, degeneration, and then that's where pain triggers can then be, in some respects, wound up. So they can become more sensitive as they get more inflammation or more degeneration to them. So if we are talking about not recommending those exercises, we're doing it for a very specific reason. So we're looking at, first of all, assessing the person, finding out what mechanism is triggering their pain, and then we need to remove that. Because when some people do go into extension, you will find that they will have their pain triggered. So it's very much just about removing that. Number 4 is even people who have healthy spines. I would describe them as an unnecessary exercise for the reasons that I've talked about before. Is that even if you've got a healthy spine, eventually your facet joints will become aggravated. So that's one of them. The lower back muscles don't strengthen or stabilize the lower part of the spine. It's the mid-back muscles. So you can start to see it's not that it's a bad exercise, or it can be if it triggers the pain, but for the most part they're just unnecessary. They're not needed in the grander scheme of things. So exercises like a plank, like a side plank, like a bird dog, like a bridge, they're much more effective exercises. They're training the whole core, they're training the upper back, they're training the abdominal wall, they're training the QL, because the QL is another good spine stabilizer. The latissimus dorsi is a good spine stabilizer. So even rows, pull downs, exercises like that are going to have a good positive effect on the lower part of the back. So you've got all those exercises which aren't extending the lower back, and they've all got a potential positive effect on the lower back. So you can start to see now that these exercises are just unnecessary, even if you've got a healthy spine. Now, if it's a sport-specific movement, or you're trying to aim at a certain goal, one of the questions I had was about the sort of toes to bar kipping type movement, which is basically where the spine can go into into extension and then into flexion. Now, as I've mentioned, if someone's trigger is flexion or extension, don't use that type of exercise because it's going to trigger the pain. The only advantage that they will have with that exercise is that there's going to be low load on the spine because the legs are hanging. So there's going to be a slightly lower load on the spine, and they're using momentum as well. So that's going to be, or not going to have as bad an effect. So you can start to see a lot of the checks and balances that come along with the exercises that need to be selected for overcoming lower back pain. And as long as you can understand those checks and balances, and you can start to weigh the benefit versus the drawback of it, and if it aligns with someone's goal, then there may be some value in doing that type of kipping and toes to bar type movement. If it triggers your pain and you're being asked to do it, or you want to do it, then you're going to be living with lower back pain for a longer period of time than if you stop doing those, find a different way of doing it, or just stop doing those, because then it depends on the person's goal, it depends on the person's preferences, so on and so forth, and depends on the person's let's just say, want or need to overcome their lower back pain. So hopefully this has possibly answered a few more questions, but the main thing is, first of all, to get an assessment. That's the first thing. Obviously, I can do that face to face, and I can do it online. I'll pop a link in the comment section, in the description below. Again, if you want to contact me, just leave a comment in the section below, and or you can just send an email to me at christopher@christopherhole.com, and we can talk about your lower back pain that way. But essentially, the first thing you need to do is get an assessment. Understand where your pain trigger is, what makes your pain worse, what makes your pain better. We can do that through the consultation and self-assessment. What we then need to do is start building a rehabilitation program, which then could include those types of sport-specific movements. There's no need for back extensions. If you want to then go back doing yoga, then it could be something to do in the future. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't do yoga or Pilates ever. There might be just some postures to avoid for a short period of time, allow the back to recover, and then go back into it. So it's understanding that. It's not about eliminating everything and saying you can't do that, you must do this. It's about giving your spine the best environment to heal and recover itself, and then that could leave you open to going back to the things that you had to stop doing for the short-term period, if that makes sense. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a method that might get touted to say you have to do this and you should stop doing that. It's more of a continuum that if we go this way, then we can possibly do a little bit more of that in the future, or if we go this way, then it's only going to make things worse. But again, that depends on the person's preferences, and that can all come out in the consultation and assessment. So hopefully that's given you a little bit more clarity on why I'm talking about not doing spine extension exercises. There are valid reasons to say you can do them, but it's understanding what those are, and do you fulfill that criteria to be able to do it. So it's a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. There's a little bit more context that needs to come into it, which again comes out in the consultation and assessment. So I'll stop there because I've probably said just about enough. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.